Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Pope Francis Generation. Paul, good to have you with us, and we are joined by someone kind of local to Paul, Liz Hansen. Welcome, Liz. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Paul, what is the topic today?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, Liz wrote a story in Crisis magazine about abuse and cover-up that happened at Franciscan University in Steubenville, a place where Liz went to school and that is also near and dear to my heart. So that's the topic we're going to be discussing today.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Pope Francis Generation, the show for Catholics struggling with the Church's teaching, who feel like they might not belong in the Church anymore, and who still hunger for a God of love and goodness.
Your hosts are me, Paul Fahey, a professional catechist.
And I'm Dominic, someone who needs catechesis. Together, we're taking our own look at the Catholic Church, her teachings and practices from three views that changed our world.
And those are the Kerygma, the Doctrine of Theosis, and the teachings of Pope Francis.
Together with you, we're the Pope Francis Generation.
Yeah, so we're here with Liz today. She graduated from Franciscan University of Steubenville in 2008 with majors in English and Theology. Her and her husband Luke met in the university's Honors Great Books program. They raise 4 kids in Michigan, and she writes for the Magnificat, Columbia, Plough, Crux, and Femme Catholic, and our local faith magazine, and maybe more. But yeah, we're really happy that you're here, Liz.
Thank you for having me.
So just as a general heads up to listeners, this discussion will include talk about sexual assault and abuse and cover-up. Yeah, that's the main focus, and something that in the past couple of years I felt like the Lord has drawn me into more discussions like this, as well as discussions of, and that's where our conversation is going to go today, of how do we continue to exist and thrive in a church where this is a part of the reality of our church. So yeah, that's why we're having this discussion today. So I first heard of Liz a couple of years ago. She wrote an article, as I said, for Crisis magazine, and that was titled Franciscan University and its Friars Face a Reckoning. I really liked what she said in that, and I looked at her bio, and it said she was in Lansing, Michigan, which is about half hour from my house. And I probably reached out to you on Twitter. That's probably what I did. And I was like, hey, we're basically neighbors. Since then, I think one of your kids went to my wife's painting classes past summer. And I was just telling Dominic, you and your family made us really yummy pork tacos after our new baby was born a few months ago. So you've had us over to your house too. I think we had shrimp kebabs. Yeah.
You're on top with what you eat at the Hansens.
Our relationship has revolved around.
It was memorable.
It's revolved around food in the past few months. But yeah, your article was written a couple of years ago, but this story has continued to be in the news with more information coming forward more recently in about the past 6 months. So yeah, I guess that's where I want to start. There's more of an introduction you want to give about yourself, and how did you come to write this article for Crisis a couple of years ago?
Okay. Yeah, like you said, my husband and I met at Franciscan. We graduated in 2008. We were super involved on campus, did everything. You know, I was editor of the student paper. We were coordinators of our households, which are they're kind of the university's alternative to sororities and fraternities, based in some sort of spiritual charism. You pray together, you do commitments together. And actually that involvement was probably my one of my closest connections to this priest that we're going to be talking about, Father David Morrier. He was the head of households during part of the time that we were there. So we would be with him a lot, leading retreats for these household leaders, kind of checking in with us to see how our groups were doing, stuff like that.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that Franciscan University that's an important part of your life if you met your husband there.
Yeah. Well, yes. So met my spouse, met the people that I still consider my closest friends. And there are people who I've become closer to since then who, you know, we may have been there at the same time and didn't really talk to each other and then have reconnected. And it's that automatic shared experience and shared formation, you know, like you were there when this happened. You heard those same homilies. You went through these same classes. There's a really immediate shared bond and understanding. So yeah, and I grew in my faith a lot. Like I don't regret the years that I spent there and the way that it formed me in my adult faith for sure.
And Franciscan, this is my perception. It is a real, like, it has a place of prominence in Catholicism in the United States, because there's all the people who went there, and I didn't go there, but through high school I went to 5 of their high school youth conferences through high school, and then have chaperoned almost as many as a young adult. And my own personal like conversion happened at one of these youth conferences, and I'll be in conversations with people I've never met before, and we'll be talking about faith stuff, and we'll talk about the youth conferences. And it's happened multiple times where it's been like, oh, what summer did you go? Oh, 2007. Oh, I was there when this speaker was there. Like there are thousands and thousands of Catholics who have been through those conferences, and that, like, there's still some of that, like you talked about, shared experience, different than being a student there, but still like where Franciscan is, has a place of prominence and more than fondness, a place of importance for a lot of Catholics in the United States.
I think I saw some statistic that was polling seminarians. Maybe they were already ordained, but it was asking them like what kind of formation they had, you know, in their teenage years, and what events or, you know, what kind of ministries may have planted seeds in their vocation. And like a surprising number had said, yeah, Steubenville conferences were a part of growing up. Yep. So yeah, they're important, and they're integral to what we see flourishing in the church.
Yeah, and I think that adds weight to this particular story. So you had said there's this story with Father Morrier, and I know bits and pieces of that story. You've written about this story, and you've kept up on it more than I have. So yeah, can you tell us what happened? What information do we know, and why is it important?
Right. So the news stories that are out there are pretty straightforward. I think you were going to link to a Pillar article.
Correct.
When you release this.
And your article in Crisis as well. We'll link to both of those.
Yeah. So I was there 2004 to 2008. So our times overlapped a bit. But Father Morrier was in contact with a female student from 2006 to 2013. He had taken her on as a spiritual director. She had come to him deeply troubled from a broken household. Like many, honestly, I had quite a few friends who were similar, in a similar position, had kind of come to school from broken families, seeking healing, and they would end up with him. He kind of had a reputation for being the priest who would offer healing prayer and meet with you regularly. So, this was one of them, and he essentially groomed her over the years, convinced her that she was possessed, and would do deliverance sessions and exorcisms on her, kind of with members of the university community and like the local charismatic community. And it was in the context of those sessions that sexual abuse occurred from him. So in 2018, she came to the police and they found her allegations credible, and they opened an investigation. And in 2021, which was when the news broke, he was charged with rape and sexual battery. And then about a year later, so last spring, he pled guilty. He took a plea deal and was sentenced to, I think, 5 years of probation.
And that all happened. Oh, so that news broke in 2001. That's when your article came out.
2021.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. 2021. And then there's a Catholic journalist, Jen Morrison, who has been, I mean, I don't know what her involvement is in this story, but she's been publishing documents for about the past 6 months or so that have added more information to that story.
Yeah, so I guess Jen's involvement would be, she's covered some similar stories about Steubenville, bringing up how claims of sexual assault have been handled on campus and things like that. So there's a connection. And I believe in the fall, I don't know, I haven't talked to her about the details of this, but I know that she and some other Catholic media were leaked documents that were pertaining to the case. So one of those documents was the police report, and another was a civil lawsuit, a draft of a civil lawsuit that was filed by the victim against the university and the Friars and others involved after his sentencing.
In this story, in the parts that I read, you have a lot, which, I mean, it's a lot like the other stories of clerical sexual abuse in the church. You have, there's like two components of profound harm. The first is the abuse itself.
Right.
And then the second is there's kind of two components to it. The second is the cover up of that abuse, and often along with that, the discrediting of the person, of the survivor in the first place. Like there's this, and everything just compiles. It compiles for that individual, and it compiles for everyone within that community. So part of the information that has come out more recently had to do with who in leadership at the university had information about what was going on and didn't act, correct?
Right. I think, I think about this a lot, what you were saying, like there's the primary abuse and crime, and that's like the first wave of shock and scandal that hits. And then I think this is where the church stumbles so quickly, is like they don't see the second and the third wave that come, and it starts with the cover up, the immediate just that immediate reaction. And then when you continue to dig in your heels and fight transparency and forthrightness, it's another blow of scandal. It's not the same thing as the original crime, but it's just it inflicts more wounds on everyone else in the pews. And that's what I was feeling among alumni who are just receiving this news and had never even been contacted by the university when this broke. So we're taking it upon ourselves. I'm calling up those women who I knew were in regular contact with Father Morrier and asking them, hey, we haven't talked in years, but did you know this happened? Are you okay? And doing that work, the university is sending us letters for like signing up for conferences and donating, and not, hey, a priest who was on campus at this time with you, has been charged, not just, accused, but also charged.
And pled guilty.
Yeah. So that was just really frustrating. I think to go back to what you're saying, when he was sentenced after he pled guilty, this woman did get up and she read her victim impact statement. And in it, she she said like that before she had come to police, she had tried to report it to numerous people in leadership at the university. And that essentially she was rebuffed. She was accused of gossiping. Not only were they complicit, but, actively tried to silence her. And so some of these documents, like the police report that was leaked, they verify that claim that she made in her statement. And that's the question that everyone wants to know is like, okay, this guy did, heinous things. That's not, no one's doubting that, but, who else was involved and needs to be held accountable. And that's, I feel the disconnect is like, obviously we're asking this question, and the university, and I think a lot of times you see it in the church overall, is just pretending that question doesn't exist.
Yeah. Or is unimportant. As if this type of abuse can happen within these institutions for this length of time without other people knowing, without other people actively or negligently protecting this person and allowing this abuse to continue. That's a really difficult thing. I mean, I didn't know the former president of Franciscan, Father Scanlon, but I know a lot of people who know him, and I know a lot of people who admire him in the way that someone would admire a saint.
Literally, like we would joke, but it was not really just a joke, like if I remember friends who were altar servers at the chapel, if they would serve with him after, he would take off his vestments in the sacristy. This is so ridiculous, but this happens in Steubenville. Like they would look, and if he had like hair or something that had come off on the chasuble, it would be a joke. Oh, we got, a future relic, but also not a joke, But
also not a joke.
Yeah.
And there's a podcast I've been listening to for years with a couple of guys who are alums of Franciscan. And when Father Scanlon died, they had like a huge tribute to him, and a lot of brought in a lot of other people to share about their experiences with him. And this particular story, it certainly cast a shadow over his legacy and his personal holiness.
It does, because it's very clear, like the police report, especially, that he knew about, he knew about these deliverance ministries. It says, I think he had Father Morrier was essentially his protege in praying over people in this way, that he was present, I think, at the first exorcism of this woman. Her civil lawsuit claims that she told him the full scope of what Morrier was doing to her in terms of abuse. And yeah, I just wonder, where was his judgment? This holy man who we looked to and, assumed we'll see canonized someday. Yeah, I just don't know how to reconcile that.
Yeah, to me, it feels a lot like, it feels a lot like looking at the legacy and holiness of Pope Benedict and St. John Paul II, and you look at things like, Father Maciel with John Paul II, and you look at the rise of Cardinal McCarrick through the ranks through John Paul II and Pope Benedict, and numerous stories like that, where on one hand, there's the reality of, it seems like this person's holiness, it seems like that's obvious. But then also, how does this, such a huge blind spot to the point that it looks straight up like neglect, if not something malicious, how does holiness and that exist at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. To me, I feel like it's even worse than trying to grapple with John Paul II and Benedict's legacies. I can understand, and I don't know, I haven't been a direct victim of abuse, but I, forgive a blind spot. But yeah, if he really dismissed her when she told him, your guy raped me, that is malicious. That's straight up evil. And just this idea of, I don't know, assuming possession and like needs for exorcism when this person is like clearly, mentally troubled and psychologically troubled. It totally colors my idea of, well, what was your vision of holiness in the spiritual life? Like if you saw demons around every corner and thought that this method of prayer was the way to exercise that, I don't know.
Yeah, and didn't see a student in that position in the relationship that she had with her spiritual director and with the vulnerability of her own. You said she had like a troubled life growing up. So I'm going to assume like the traumas that she brought with her into that, like not recognizing the vulnerability, like how vulnerable she was, and giving deference to that vulnerability when hearing her story. Yeah, that sounds more than negligent.
Yeah.
This also impacts because the current president of Franciscan, who Father Dave Povanka, who I have heard speak many times, I've used his resources many times, I've quoted him many times in different things that I've done. He was also named in these documents, and he also participated in some of these deliverance prayer sessions, didn't he?
I don't know. I don't think he was named as being present in any of the sessions, but he is named in the civil lawsuit as one of the people that she came to and asked for help, and was dismissed according to this lawsuit. So yeah, and even just by the university's response to their supporters and to alumni alone, like under his leadership, I agree. Like I was there on campus with Father Dave Povanka. I went to Austria the first semester that he was there. I remember him praying over me in Assisi. He was a rock star. Everyone loved him. And it's very frustrating to just look at him and just wonder, like, is this just a willful ignorance of how your response is being received? Is it intentional? I don't know. Yeah.
How do you, this is much more of a personal question. How do you view the university now? Like my connection to the university is just the conferences. Now I say just, like I've said, that was a huge part of my own spiritual life. But there's enough distance for me to be like, I don't really ever have to have contact with Franciscan University again if I don't want to. And I have some friends who went there, but I don't have an ongoing relationship. But your experience is different. Like, how do you, something that being a student there was really good for you, how do you balance that with the the implications of the truth that's now being revealed?
Yeah, it's hard. I think we were talking earlier about I guess different camps that people fall into, or maybe when we were prepping for this interview, and some people are like, burn it all down. We want nothing to do with it. They might be in various stages of just shedding their faith because just the dissonance is too great. And you don't know what to do. So, you got to walk away. Yeah, I've been there. I've definitely have empathized with that. I don't know. It's hard to reconcile, we go to a parish where there are a lot of Steubenville grads. One of our music ministers, who you also know, and ate shrimp kebabs with us when you came over. She'll often she was there the same years as me, and sometimes she'll play like that type of song that you only heard at Steubenville. And so I'll be there at Mass and immediately be brought back to, oh, this was the place where I was falling in love with the Mass and in growing, in my faith. And also at the same time, you're kneeling there trying to pray, with these conflicting emotions. And also I'm so angry, yeah, it's a tension and it's hard. I don't know that I've come to resolve it very well. But yeah, I think just trying to find, I hear a lot of people saying I'm just trying to hold on.
Yeah. What do you do with that anger?
What do I do with that anger? I realized at some point, maybe last year, so maybe a year and a half after all this news came out. I don't know what made me realize this, but I was I think every time I go to Mass, I'm angry and I'm angry about this. And that is a really, and it was kind of subliminal. I didn't think it had burrowed in that deep. That's a heavy thing to carry, spiritually and emotionally. I'd go to Mass and want to bust some kneecaps. Just, I don't know. I think I've learned that it's okay to bring that anger to the altar, and that I can carry it. I remember in 2018, when all those scandals are coming out about McCarrick and
in the Pennsylvania grand jury report, and all of that was hitting at once.
Right. I remember Simca Fisher wrote an article, and this was the one thing that I keep going back to, and I still remember. And I think the crux of it was Jesus is not an abuser. And, she was saying all these vile reactions that we're rightly feeling, in the pit of our stomach, that's natural and that's good. And, we were validated for feeling that. But it's directed at McCarrick. It's directed at the people who wrought this evil, and that Jesus was not the abuser, and that he knows, he weeps with us. And I carry that a lot when I feel those feelings.
Yeah, I've had. Yeah, so for me in the past year, a little bit more, but especially in the past year, I've been confronted with leadership in my local church. And trying to be somewhat vague and respectful in this, but leadership who I thought were good people. And then I had conversations with them about, hey, there's this bad stuff going on. And the response being, well, that's not really important. And then walking away and being how can you be a good person and a good leader and allow this harm to continue when you're the one responsible for it, right? And it's really, really difficult. And this is something really insidious about spiritual abuse. There's a couple of components here that you touched on. One was the Mass for Catholics is this place of profound healing and encounter with the Lord. It's supposed to be a place of healing and comfort and grace. But when abuse from the church, when harm from the church happens, these places of comfort and healing become places of harm, and places where anxiety and anger and all these things are triggered. So now not only has my experience of these places that used to bring me comfort, not only has that been distorted, but now the places where I would have gone for comfort in the first place are now off limits.
Right.
And then also, I believe 110% that Jesus is on the side of those who've been abused, because he's always associated himself with those who were with with the marginalized and the victims. He's always associated himself. And that he's not just on their side, but if someone has been harmed, he is present with them in a very real way, that he is present in those who have been harmed. Like, I believe that to be true. But at the same time, when it's someone wearing a collar, someone who represents Jesus, someone who's a successor of the apostles, someone who so sacramentally, like, represents Jesus,
Right.
who's doing the harm and then covering things up and perpetuating the harm, at times it's difficult to believe that Jesus is on the side of the person who is harmed and not
Right.
and not the abuser.
Or even, looking at, wondering how could you have done so much good if, it reminds me of, so one of the people who are mentioned in the police report was the friar who was the provincial of the Third Order regular, Franciscan community that Morrier was a part of, and that they run Franciscan University. And I knew this priest, his name is Father Richard Davis, and he was notified. He knew the full extent of, spiritual abuse, sexual abuse. And the response was, well, we got to get him out of here. We got to not, we have to keep her quiet. So we'll give her a settlement to sign as long as she doesn't, retain a lawyer. She can't mention abuse outside of therapy, which, by the way, is provided by the school. So we keep it all, in this tight circle. And he signed off on this. And this priest, I remember my senior year, one of my friends died very suddenly after like a flu outbreak on campus. And there was a memorial mass for her. It was packed, overflowing, standing room. And this same priest said the homily for that mass. And I went back recently and I went through, I was working for the student paper, so I had written an article about this. And I found the article about the homily that he had given, and it was perfect. It was exactly what this community needed, what her family needed. It was beautiful. And I think my immediate reaction again was just this flaming white anger and bewilderment. Like, how could you have been so perfectly, what we needed, the conduit of grace that we needed in that moment, and then turn around a couple of years later and do this to this other woman.
Yeah. How can both of those things be true?
Yeah. And they are.
And they are. After the summer of 2018 in McCarrick and the Pennsylvania Grand Jury Report, Bishop Barron wrote a few things about the abuse scandal in the church. And there's one thing he wrote that the first paragraph made me really angry, because he was like, he's like, this is demonic, and because the church is so good, it's especially, targeted by evil. And I'm like, don't be blaming this on evil spirits. And then he's like, his second paragraph was something like, I know a lot of you are hearing me as blaming this on evil spirits. That's not what I mean. Mm-hmm. And the article is pretty good.
Who was? I'm sorry, I missed. Who said that?
Bishop Barron.
Barron. Okay.
And I forget which article it was. He's written several things on this, but something that's been really clarified for me over the past year or so is that I would articulate the particularly insidious spirit in the church around abuse is, and this was something that Gloria Purvis talked about in a podcast a while ago. She had a guest on, and she referenced that. So the church has a teaching on the we give a preferential option to the poor, right? If someone's poor and marginalized, we ought to give them preferential treatment. The phrase she used was, the church has a preferential option for the institution.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And she said that, and it was like light bulbs went off. I'm like, that's it. If we're going to name the Spirit, that's the Spirit, where somehow leadership in the church are able to look past the harm that's being done and still preference the security of the institution.
Yeah. I think it's a spirit of pride and fear and like an inability to see beyond, just a very narrow vision of what I need to protect and what has been there for me, and not to see who is outside that range, and it's just like, it's like the Good Samaritan, like who's falling on the side of the road. And we're just like, I'm gotta go, keep going to this direction. And there's people dying and bleeding out.
Yeah. And people who will continue to be harmed and bleeding out as long as, so
I'll say, like you were talking about, I don't know. Yeah, we were talking about protecting the institutions, and something that kind of, I don't know, was a bomb to me was around this time that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to mass every single day, like just so angry. I ended up talking to a priest that I did trust on this issue. I had a feeling he would get it, but I was still kind of bracing myself for like the trite responses I feel like we usually get, like, well, the church is full of sinners, or like, well, we're all human, or
as if the sins that I commit are equal to like sexual abuse and institutional cover-up. Like, sure.
And yes, I am a sinner. Sure. Like that's not what, or, well, we don't put our trust in people. We only, this is why we trust in Jesus. And so I was kind of bracing myself for that, even though I felt like I could trust him to not say it. But he was just like, this wounds our faith. This does damage. And just him saying that, honestly, like I realized how I rarely hear that acknowledged. I think you're expected to just be able to like kind of get back up, and if you struggle, then you must be a worse Catholic. And then he said, it was like, no institution or organization is worth protecting at the expense of transparency and full honesty. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I have never, just hearing that, like it's obvious, but I just realized, like, the contrast of hearing it from one priest and never hearing it from other pulpits or from the hierarchy, like where I don't see that kind of moral backbone and will to follow it up with actions anywhere.
Yeah. We had Mark Shea on the podcast last year, and he made a point that has stuck with me since. He was talking about Vatican II, and he said all the bishops of the world got together, and in one of the teaching documents they say, and it was just a really profound and essential teaching, that human beings are the only creatures who exist for no other purpose. Like they are their own end. They have value in and of themselves. He said, and then these bishops, so many of them go back to their own diocese and spend decades not putting the individual person first, but using them as shields to protect the institution. When the reality of that teaching is that businesses, economies, political parties, and institutions are to serve the good of the human person, not the other way around. So we have this profound like hypocrisy within the church, within like what she teaches, which is profoundly beautiful. Human beings are ends in and of themselves, and institutions should be serving the good of the persons. And there's no institution worth protecting that is for to diminish the dignity of the human. Like, you don't protect the institution, you protect the person. And we failed so miserably since then. And I feel like we're only beginning to see the fallout of that hypocrisy in the church.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times people try to get around it by saying, no, this was bad. I see a mentality to try to pin it all on, well, there was one bad actor in the past, and, we're so sorry. And we completely condemn what he did back then, but no acknowledgement of everything else in this culture that allowed it to happen. And that is still continuing. Like, if the longer you prolong this and don't, shine the light of transparency on it, the longer you're perpetuating that culture. And that's what I don't see, is like the willingness to address the stuff over there. Everyone's in agreement that, abuse is bad, but what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. So, I wanted to talk with you and have this conversation because this story out of Franciscan feels like a microcosm of the Catholic Church as a whole, and that's come out in our discussion as we've talked about this. A good friend of mine and ministry partner, Monica Pope, she's in the past several years especially been, and not really by choice, just by, I guess, by providence, has begun accompanying clerical abuse survivors. And she's talked with me about the need to have a third space. And what she means is that, like you had mentioned earlier, we tend to fall in camps when something like this happens, when abuse and scandal happen in the church. Either it's burn the whole thing down, it's all bad, or defend the institution at all costs. Mm-hmm. But neither of those are good enough. And really neither of those are honest or truthful or real. And what I heard in your article from a couple of years ago, and what I've heard in our friendship and the things we've talked about in this discussion, is that you're able to navigate this third space of like, I can be really, really angry, and justly so, and not want to burn the whole thing down because I still see some good, but also I have no more interest in defending this institution. So yeah, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, you mentioned Monica to me earlier, and it just kind of reinforced my desire to meet her and talk to her too. So hi, Monica, if you're listening, like, should have coffee. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure that third space out. Something I've been thinking of over maybe the past year is just to cling to the vine however you can. And if it means letting go of all of the, the Franciscan University culture and all the things that, were a part of that, if you can't go and seek Christ through those things anymore, then fine. Like, cut it away. If it means clinging to the vine by going to by reading different books or doing different devotions or finding different friends who understand, then cling that way, and for all your life, basically. And sometimes it's been I've found surprising ways that I've been able to hold on. Part of it is like my kids go to our parish school and they go to school mass like 3 times a week. And I started going, and it was just, for me, it was a really healing experience just to like sit there in the back and listen to these little children sing, songs like "O Come, Emmanuel,"
which is the best.
It would just make me cry because I'm like, this is, going up to the altar. I just wanted the stripped down simplicity of why I'm still Catholic, which is to go to the altar and receive Jesus. And so many things get in the way, and will mar that experience, but not those kids at that moment. Like when they come home and they're in my van or whatever, then they'll like, that's a different story. But I don't like their simple faith, like I would say lifted mine for like a good amount of a year. I don't know, seeking things out like that. And no matter how silly or, I don't know, minor it may seem, if it keeps you afloat, then hold on to it.
Yeah. I liked your point about being okay with letting go of the aspects of Catholicism. If you feel like you need to. My experience of the past year has kind of been the opposite, where I used to go to Mass 3 or 4 times a week. And I only go now, and for about the past year, I've pretty much only gone when I've been obligated to. Mm-hmm. But I've encountered the Lord in really profound and fruitful ways, in praying at home, which isn't putting down of the Mass is not important, but as my spiritual life had to change based on my experiences in the church.
Yeah. And recognizing, okay, what drew me close to God then and isn't giving me life now. And just because it's something, a devotion is good, it doesn't mean it's, it's integral to Catholicism. Like you have to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. We are coming up on an hour. You talked about earlier having a conversation with a priest who you were pretty sure was going to respond well, but not 100% positive. And you talked about some of the, I guess for lack of a better word, trite responses that we often give, that I've certainly given in the past, when people have talked about the scandal that they're experiencing because of abuse and cover-up in the church.
Don't you know how often it happens in like public schools, or like how the church has improved? Like,
yep, you're missing the point.
Wow.
So I respond to people differently now. I guess maybe as we wrap up, how do you respond to people now when someone else brings up their experience in those topics? And how would you encourage listeners to and not with judgment? Like I can't tell you how many times I've given those responses. Like
and they made sense to me at a certain point.
I absolutely believed them. But yeah, what encouragement can you give listeners to maybe rethink some of those responses when other people bring that up?
And
this wasn't on our outline. I'm just throwing this question at you.
I think just thinking about how a certain response impacted me and immediately just made me feel validated, I would just say, first, acknowledge the wound in the cause of it, and just affirm their suffering and the reason for it. And I think even just sitting with that and not trying to solve it or explain it goes a long way.
Absolutely. Liz, this has been a really good discussion. Dominic, you've hardly said a word. Do you have anything to add?
Just had a lot to think about and take in. No, I don't have much to add other than a lot resonated coming out of my background. Listeners to the show might know a lot of radical traditionalism, a lot of kind of cult-like mentalities. So there are some stories of abuse back in there, rumors that I've heard of that I never really dug into. And a lot of this sounds unfortunately familiar. And I'm grateful for conversations like this, or for creating a space where we can have these kinds of conversations, because we're desiring to be faithful in spite of the Judases that are out there, or find a way forward in spite of the reality of these failings. Not like you've pointed out, not ignoring them or brushing them under the rug, but recognizing them and finding a way forward. So
and still hanging on to the good.
Yeah, still looking for the good without whitewashing the problem. Yeah. So thank you, Liz.
Thanks.
Liz, is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Oh, I think that's it.
Excellent. Dominic, you want to take us away?
Sure thing. Well, thanks again, Liz, for joining us. Friends, if you enjoyed this conversation, if it resonated with you, hit that like button. Hit the like button. It does help more people to hear Liz's message, to discover this show. Helps the YouTube algorithm, share this with more people. And hey, if you're enjoying these conversations, we would absolutely love to meet you and hang out.
Yeah, you can. If you like these conversations and want to go further, you can check out Father's Heart Academy, which is a community for folks looking for more compelling answers to their questions about the faith, and who are looking for a more authentic gospel and to dive into what the church actually teaches and not folks' opinions on that.
Yeah, I'm really excited that Paul and I have been working on getting, well, he's been doing the work, I've been helping him, but getting this academy off the ground, it's really this, I've enjoyed every conversation over the last couple of seasons with Paul, and now others have been asking, we want our 2 cents or our 2 minutes with Paul. So you can get that chance to meet with Paul regularly, discuss recent podcasts like this one or current events in the church. There are upcoming seminars, there are workshops on specific topics and magisterial documents. There's a lot that Paul is putting into building this Father's Heart Academy. So you should come and check it out at fathersheartacademy.com. Paul, if our friends have a question or feedback on this podcast and they're not yet ready for the Academy, where can they go?
Yeah, our host for this podcast is PopeFrancisGeneration.com.
There you go. PopeFrancisGeneration.com. You can't forget it. And like I said, we'd love to meet you. Come and hang out with us and Smart Catholics. It's the free online community for Catholic millennials, creators, and learners who want faithful conversations, unafraid of doubts and questions. Plus, we're free of trolls and ads and toxicity. So join us at smartcatholics.com. Till next time, say a short prayer for yourself and for us. And remember, don't be afraid to ask questions. Doubts can be a sign that we want to know God better and more deeply. God bless you.